Magnificent. So we are going to have a tour of the Moulder workshop, a live tour, which is deeply impressive. Can I hand you over, please, to Eric and Jane Moulder? Thank you.
Well, hello and welcome to the workshop. It's a real pity that we can't be up in the Yorkshire Dales at Bolton Castle for medieval music in the Dales this year, but it gives us an opportunity to for you to come to the workshop instead and have a look around and see what we get up to, to give you some idea of what goes on in our world. But first of all, I'm going to hand you over to Jane, because beginning of this talk will have a particular reference to Bolton Castle and medieval music in the Dales, and in particular the first one. So over to you, Jane.
Right, swapping the camera around so you can see me. Yeah, the first medieval music in the Dales, I went up on my own because Eric was really busy that weekend, and I was on the exhibition stand. And we often have people come up and show interest in the instruments, even though they're not players. And this man came up and he had some delightful, beautifully well-behaved children with him. And he was taking a real interest in the instruments, but particularly the wood. And he introduced himself as Tom the Woodman. And he was asking what were the instruments originally made from, and I explained sycamore, and that there was a tradition of making the instruments from sycamore. And he said, I've grown sycamore. He said, my family has grown sycamore as a crop. So I got very interested, and then I realised through talking that Tom the Woodman was actually Tom Ord Powlett, who owned Castle Bolton and the estate, and that's where our link with the wood from the Castle Bolton estate started. So I'm now going to turn the camera back to Eric so he can explain a bit more.
Yes, well, the next year I went up there and got introduced to Tom, and we made an arrangement to go and buy a couple of trees from the Bolton Castle estate. And so a couple of years, well, a year later, a year and a half later, one fantastic February, blue skies, very cold, but blue skies. We went up, met up with Tom, and we went out into the woods and met up with a couple of the woodmen and walked around and selected various trees, looked at various trees, and I said, oh, what about this one? And they'd say, oh no, that's going to thin the canopy too much. What about this one? Oh, it's leaning over. And eventually we eventually settled on two trees. And you can see on the picture here, here one of the woodmen is chipping away at the bark to reveal what is underneath in what the grain of the wood is going to be like. And we ended up with this fabulous tree here. It's one of my favourite photographs. So this is a sycamore tree, and there was another one somewhere. I can't remember which one it was. Anyway, there were two trees. Oh yes, it's this one here. There were two trees that we selected. And then we went away, and then sometime later, about a few weeks later, the woodman went and cut these trees down, filled them, and they cut them up into the thicknesses of wood that we wanted, which you can see here in the lower picture, because it's actually very difficult to get substantial size wood of the right sort for instrument making, but they were very kind, and they planked it up. And here you can see it stacked up in the forest, in one of the roundhouses, one of two roundhouses they had that are sort of historical buildings that were used for the mating of horses. We shall go into that later. So, okay, so this is this is the picture here of the timber on the Bolton Castle estate that is going to be made into musical instruments. So before we leave this corner of the workshop, over here we have the famous crumple boiler. That is the thing that generates the steam and allows us to bend the crumples. So if you follow me, past an old harmonium I want to get rid of, past a couple of harpsichords that we're gradually working on. And here we have the timber stacked up in the workshop. So this is the sycamore, figured sycamore, some of it's got some beautiful patterning in the grain. which the woodman revealed when he sort of took the bark off. And it's here drying in the workshop. It's indoors now, and it's stacked up with stickers between the wood to allow the air to circulate. It will remain here for quite some time. So this is 2 trees, not quite 2 trees, because there is still some wood outside waiting to come in. And you can see the various thicknesses, and it's being monitored all the time. I have meters which I test the wood to see what its moisture content is, and it's one of my paranoias is about the humidity in the workshop. There is some beautiful figure in the grain, and I think you can see it particularly on this one here, starting to come through.
I don't know if you can see that. I'm trying my best to get the angles right.
So this really is the first stage of it in our workshop. We fetched this down end of the last year, I think it was eventually. So if you come upstairs now, if you follow me, we'll go up to the top floor of the workshop. We're very blessed to have such a big space. So here we are on the top floor of the workshop, and this is where the industry really takes place. The next stage from the planks of wood that you saw downstairs is that the wood is then cut up and billeted into various sizes, depending what instruments we are going to make and what instruments I think we can get out of the wood. It's a process of selection all the time. Right from the tree, we selected the trees for the good quality wood, not free. We're now selecting the wood from the planks of the billets. We're selecting the billets from the planks of wood, looking for straight grain, good quality. And so what we have stacked up here are a load of bits and pieces for bass kirtles, alto kirtles, shawm bells, bassoons, some have been borne out already, more alto kirtles, more tenor kirtles, Raschpfeif, and the wood is labelled so we know where it's come from and when it came upstairs. So, for example, this is going to be an alto F kirtle. It came from Bosley, which is not far from Leek, Bosley Crossroads, a plantation up there. Again, a couple of trees, and it came up here in November 2017. So it's been up here quite a while, and that'll be really nice and dry by the time we come to use it. The rule of thumb is that it's 1 year for drying. It's 1 year for per inch of thickness plus another one on top. But I'm so slow at making things that we never use wet timber. So anyway, so this, moving on, let's talk about the Spanish shawm, because that's an instrument that has proved to be quite popular amongst the people who attend medieval music in the Dales, because it is sort of a more of an earlier variety of shawm perhaps than the mainstream Renaissance one. This is going to be your Spanish shawm. So this has been billeted and cut up, and it's been up here drying. So that lump of wood will eventually be reduced. The first thing that happens in the process, excuse me, the first thing that happens in the process is that we cut the bore of the instrument. Woodwind instruments are always made inside out. You cut the bore, you finish the bore, and then you center your piece of wood, your workpiece, up on the bore and finish the outside. A lot of people haven't thought about it and don't realize it, but if you sort of turn the piece of wood to look like a shawm, and then you try to drill it and try to ream it, several things will happen, will go wrong. One, the hole would never come out the center of the piece of wood, and the other thing is in the reaming process, which is quite a tough process, you would split the wood. So the wood is bolted down onto this machine here called a boring machine. Not that it's not interesting. It's a converted lathe from it was made in 1910, an American lathe, and we've converted it so we can bolt the wood down onto the saddle here, and then we put various size drills in it, biggest first, getting smaller and smaller and smaller until the drills come out to the other end. So a big drill goes in that far, slightly smaller, a bit further, smaller, a bit further, smaller, a bit further, smaller, a bit further. So to bore, it's called step boring, because when you look down it, it's a series of steps. And for this instrument, there are 12 different size drills, or augers, as they're called, that will go, that will travel down this wood and come out the other end.
So that's the little schedule. That's what we work to.
Those are the 12 different augers that we will use to bore this piece of wood. Here we have the set of augers, which are all made in the workshop. You can't go into your local B&M and say, can I have an 8.5mm diameter auger for boring out a soprano shawm? They will call the police, I think. So they're all, you have to be a tool maker and an engineer in a way before you start becoming a woodwork instrument maker. So those are the augers. Having cut the bore, the next thing is that you need to, having step bored the bore, the next thing you need to do is to ream the bore to give it a smooth finish. And we have machine reamers, and we also have hand reamers. We use a lot of hand reamers. And that is the reamer for the Spanish shawm. The soprano in C. It also does the D size as well. And that is wound down into the wood by hand with a little bit of oil on it to ease it. And that will scrape the inside of the instrument bore to give you a really smooth finish. The bores are never straight tapers. They have very sort of subtle changes, perturbations, so they're moving in and out. And that is not sort of an accident in making. They're there deliberately so that you can deal with the tuning of the second octave of the instrument. So that is then scraped out with the auger, with the reamer, and after that it is put onto the wood turning lathe and turned down to get the outside shape. So having finished the inside, the waste wood is cut off and then is put onto the lathe and turned down. And what I have on here at the moment is a tenor crumb horn that's being turned down. A tenor crumb horn, sort of diverging a little bit here. That's what your tenor crumb horn starts off. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with this, because this week we put up on Facebook a series of 22, 23 photographs showing the processes involved in making a tenor crumb horn. But anyway, that will be turned down on this wood turning lathe. And so will the shawm. And then you end up with you end up with a piece of wood, white, which is then this shape without the holes in it. And by this time, you've only got perhaps about 15% of the wood that you started off with. These instruments are mainly air. Very pretty grain piece of wood. That's from Bosley Cloud as well. The crumb horns are bored out on this lathe with long, very long, thin augers, and I thought you would like to see the longest drill that we have in the workshop.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to get back a bit. There you go.
This is 2 meters long, and the business end is only a short bit on the end. That's 2 meters long, 8.5 millimeters in diameter, and it will go down this piece of wood here. That is going to be an extended bass crumb horn, and it will come out almost in the middle of the piece of wood. So next time you've got your power drill out, and you're trying to put out a set of shelves and drill a hole in the exact spot in the right place in the wall, and it's going all over the place, just cast your mind back to today. So there we have. So that's our longest auger and our biggest piece of wood, our longest piece of wood. That's going to stay there. So that's the process. The next thing that happens with the shawm is that it's just a piece of wood. We then mark out and drill the holes, and a lot of care is taken with that. And the holes are cleaned out, and
I'll come in on the holes. Here we go.
And the tops are overcut slightly, so they're smooth. This is not an accident. It's done deliberately, that you take away all sharp edges on wind instruments because it helps their performance. And then there's the little pirouette at the top here that is also made, and that there's almost as much work in that small piece with the metalworking and fixing it together as there is in the rest of this piece of wood here. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Renaissance woodwind instruments in particular, you'll be looking at this and thinking, oh, he's made a mistake and he's covered the hole with wax. It was quite traditional in the Renaissance and before medieval period, very often to make instruments so that they could be played either one way, one hand, or the other. So this little finger hole at the bottom here, which isn't in line, so you can get to it, it would be very uncomfortable to play if it was in line, is offset to one side, so you can reach it, and it's duplicated on the other side. The hole you don't need is then filled up with wax. So in this, I suppose in my instrument making career, I think I've made only 2 round the other way for people who wanted to play that way up. If you look at the illustrations of players in the past, it's sort of an even split, probably favouring this way round, the right-handed way rather than the left-handed way. So there you have the development of the shop. So the wood that I showed you downstairs, that is yet to be billeted, although we have got some cut up for the Spanish shore. So next year, all being well, when we're back at Bolton Castle with our stand, we shall have instruments that are made from timber from the Bolton Castle estate. And I really think that's a touch of magic, because it's about bringing wood to life. It's about sort of the metamorphosis of timber. You cut it down and it's dead, but it isn't. It now has another life and it can sing. So let's see if we can make this work. Oh yes, the wreaths. The wreaths. The squeaky bit at the top that people discard and throw away and lose is about as much stress in making that, probably more than the rest of the instrument, because they are really they're the sound generator. They're the soul of the instrument. I'm going to go down in here and have a tootle on it. I'll try and get a little bit further away so that the zoom won't cut out the sound of the instrument. So here we have it. Because we're not talking a concert. So that's Renaissance, our medieval style, Spanish shawm, probably an earlier type, very similar to the tipla and tenora that are still played in the north of Spain today. So some of those will be up there at Bolton Castle. But I also thought I'd lay out for you a few of the crumhorns that we've got, because as well as the woodworking stuff that we do here, we do an awful lot of metalworking as well, because we make everything. We make what comes into the workshop comes in as raw material. Sort of, you've seen the wood. It also comes in for the metalworking as just simply sheets of brass, and from this we make the key work. So what I've got here at this end of the table, if Jane comes and sort of homes in on it, is sets of key work that we have made to go onto some alto kirtles, or dulciers as they're sometimes called as well. This is a tenor, so the alto is slightly smaller, and all this is made from the sheet material that you've seen there, in exactly the same way as the Renaissance masters made it. So we've got the key covers, which have been made with the ends soldered on. the flaps ready to have the leather sewn on, and we make everything as much as we can to be the way it was made on the original instruments, because that really gives you a feel for the instrument that you're playing. We don't use modern keywork. That's not particularly authentic. So the pads that will be put on here will be leather, stuffed with sheep's wool, not cotton wool, sheep's wool, because it's slightly springier, and hand sewn. And these are going to be the crooks, the little bits that hold the reed on the top. That's for the boots. So that's our set for 3 Alto F kirtles that we're going on here. That's a tenor kirtle, the finished one here with the keywork. You can see how that is hidden. The keywork was never exposed in this period, because I think it was, the key covers are partly protection, partly decorative, but I think it's also sort of part of the mystery of the instrument. They didn't want to see the vulgar keywork and how that worked. Is what's going on here. This is sort of some mysterious mechanical action underneath. The kirtles are double bored. They're done on the boring machine in exactly the same way. And I have here a prototype. You can see it's slightly smaller, for a high-pitched 466 tenor kirtle. We make the bells separate. There were several methods of making those. Some of them are integral. You can see that on the end here, that is double bored. What we do in this workshop is engineering with wood. It's slightly crazy. We are working to sort of very, very fine tolerances. In general, you know, if it has to be 22 millimeters, it has to be 22 millimeters. 22 and a half, 21 and a half, not good enough. It has to be spot on. So we're engineering wood. The reason is that all these measurements, all these different sizes, make a big difference to the pitch of the instrument and how it plays. So each instrument has to be the same as the one before, because we know that works. So when it comes to double boring, we have 2 holes down this instrument, and they are very close together, and starting off small at the top and getting larger as it goes down. It then crosses over underneath, and the crossing is within the wood, and then comes up the other side. There will be 2 plugs that go in the bottom, and then it becomes one continuous column of air, which is plugged up, and so the instrument is shortened or curtailed. But we have to get those boards exactly the right distance apart, so it's accuracy. So moving on back to the crumb horns, this is going to be an extended tenor crumb horn, and I thought it was difficult to see on the photographs that we put up on Facebook. This has obviously been bent, and for the bending process, it would have been packed out with sand and plugged to stop the bore collapsing. The bore will collapse a little bit, it's inevitable, but the sand is there to prevent that from happening. But what happens is there's a metal strap that goes around the back to stop it from splitting, because the wood, what we're trying to do is break the wood in half. It does not want to be put into this shape, hence the steaming process. And it flattens off around the back. And what you see here on the back is where the bending strap, the wood has crushed itself up against the bending strap. That is then taken and shaped to produce a round shape, so it looks exactly like this, as though nothing has ever happened to it. It's always been like that. And you can see on this particular instrument the pretty grain here, the ripple effect, and you can see it here in the wood how it's bent. And if you won't be able to see this, but as I rub my finger over it, it's corrugated, it's undulated, and that's just the wood, and that's the grain in the wood, and it will end up looking like this, and it will be absolutely round. One of the things that always fascinates me is the craftsmanship of these men, women, people who made these instruments 500 years ago. They had such a good eye for line. And it's on a crumb horn, there are only 2 straight lines. Everything else is moving. The 2 straight lines are this part here on the wind cap and the ferrule on the wind cap. Everything else is moving in or out. And on the back, it's got a slight curve on it. And if you measured it as it comes down, it's getting wider and wider on a very, very regular basis. If you plotted that as on a graph, it's an absolute straight line. But there's this sort of gentle curve on the back. So the thing has got this energy and there's this movement in it. So as well as being good instruments to play, they were things of beauty to look at as well. And as I say, I've always admired their lines. What I've got here are, as I say, a set of crumbles. It's not actually a set. These are our own soprano and alto. The tenor and bass with the unauthentic keyboard at the top is they're going off to some friends of mine called the Crumbs, and they'll be delivered to Bristol. So here we are. Here's the bass with its keywork, and you can see here. Shall I hold that up? Or are you okay? Yeah. You can see here. That's the action, and the little pad underneath, and the stirrup here over the key to help silence the clatter of the key. That's the design of that, with the leaf spring over it. These are modelled on a gentleman who was the most famous crumple maker in the early part of the 16th century, a gentleman called Georg Wehr of Memmingen, and his instruments were highly renowned throughout Europe, even finding their way, we believe, to this country. What always interests me, and we do exactly the same, is that his key covers weren't made in this way with an end soldered on. They were made in one piece. So this piece of brass has been a flat piece of brass has been beaten round, the ends have been beaten over, there are no seams in it. It's just one piece of brass that has been worked to be that shape. And it's not flat across the top. It sits on the crumb horn, and the curve of the key cover, that's it, I knew it fitted. The curve of the key cover matches the curve of the instrument. Aesthetics were really important. And so that's the bass, and then we have got here one of the most beautiful instruments in the crumb horns range, which is an extended bass. So it's slightly larger than a bass and has extra keywork on it to take you down from the F with the sliders under at the bottom here. So the bottom, so the second key controls 3 notes. So if I play this, that's your key note, the F. Second key is you E or D or lovely diapason C. You had to know your piece of music beforehand because you needed to preset those sliders. But I think this is a beautiful instrument, again with the curved key cover following the line of the instrument. What else have I got to show you in the workshop? Yes, up here we have a whole little rack of crumb horns that have been bent and are drying. The bending process takes, in the boiler downstairs, we steam them for a couple of days, and they come out and are bent round jigs, which I forgot to get out. Doesn't matter.
You can look on Facebook.
You can look on Facebook, and there is also a video on Facebook of me bending the crumb horns, and you'll see that to bend them actually takes less than 30 seconds. You have to be quick, you have to be steady with it, because if you're slow with it, the wood starts to cool down and you need the temperature in order to bend them. We put tourniquets on them to stop the straightening out. It's just a belt and braces thing. Probably at this stage they don't really need it. This one has already started to have been shaped. I have a wonderful shaping machine that shapes up the curtains and also shapes up the crumb horns. It's extremely versatile, and it goes under the name of Jane.
Hey!
But we also, I mean, over the years I've developed a name, obviously, for Eric Moulder makes crown horns and also makes curl tools. But I think slightly less known is the fact that we do make shawms. And we have over the years developed a whole series of shawms based on the sort of Renaissance, I say Renaissance shawms. This style of shawm appears at the end of the medieval period, and we're looking probably as early as like 1440, 1430. Certainly the late 15th century, they're quite well established in the sort of the a cappella bands and the smaller sizes, sopranos and altos. So what we have here is some sopranino, it's a little Spanish one, and soprano Renaissance style, sopranino, soprano, alto, and tenor. And again, these guys had an eye for line. It's just, we base the shapes of them exactly on what the old masters did, and the way they shaped the bells, which are quite thin, and the key work, and the key work. Let's see if we can get this on. No, look at that. Oh yes, yeah. Sounds good, doesn't it? Well, we'll pass on that. All I can say is the key work is very similar to the key work on the base curtain. And no, I don't normally put my instruments over a radiator. The radiator is not on, and it's just there for show.
It's a temporary shelf.
But what I have got here on the end, again, you can see sort of gives you some idea where we start. Those three pieces of wood are going to end up making an alto shawm. So we've got the top part here, we have the bell section here, and we have the fontanelle section there. So those are going to end up as an alto shawm looking like this one. The wood that we have here, unfortunately I don't have any more of that, but that is wood that came from the estates at Westdean College, and English paper were very beautiful, and we bought several trees there. So I think that sort of wraps up, other than, of course, this section over here, what I'm engaged in at the moment.
This is our view from the workshop.
It's reed making and scraping, and I'm just finishing off a set of reeds for a very old set of panels of mine from a customer from about 25 years ago. So I sit here working away, looking out over our little garden, because most of it's taken up by this big workshop, and at our house here in this row of 21 weavers' cottages. So yes, so thank you very much. There we have it. Whistle stop tour of our little world of instrument making. So hopefully we'll be back at Bolton Castle next year. I do hope so, and this will all settle down and we can turn up and have the fun and music making, and we'll see you there next year with our instruments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. And I have to say, Eric, prepare yourself, because I've got quite a few questions for you. All right. You should see on the chat just how fascinated everybody was. Okay. So first of all, David, are you there? Because you had a couple of searching questions. Are you there, David? Unmute yourself.
Yeah. So I can't remember my questions now. Let me go back. I was interested in knowing how they managed to make the bore in the Middle Ages, because it looks like you've got quite a long, what I could call drill bits.
Oh, I didn't.
So how to make? Say again, David.
How did they make the bore in Middle Ages with the equipment that they had? Basically.
Oh, that's a fascinating question. To be honest, we don't really know. All I can say is that I think the period that I make these instruments, sort of the late 15th, early 16th century, the craftsmen were sort of the space age of wood technology. And I like to think that if a craftsman from that period walked into my workshop, he would know most of the tools that I use. He would be astonished by electricity and electric light, and that's the big difference, that we have electricity to sort of move things, to motivate things. When it comes to boring of the instruments out, they must have had something similar to the boring lathe, something like this. Wouldn't have necessarily been made out of steel, it could have been made out of wood. The wood turning lathes were quite sophisticated and made out of wood. We really don't know. All I can say is that they worked with, I think, quite an astonishing deal of accuracy considering what they did have. Certainly for the boring of the narrow bores, like on the crumb horns, two things going on here. First of all, the crumb horns, the existing original crumb horns, I think are nearly all pith bored. What I mean by that is it's a hole that goes down the centre of a small branch. Using maple and sycamore, the actual pith, the very centre, is slightly soft, and I think that would guide the drill. And I think this is, I think the reason for that is that it's looking back at a more sort of folk traditional method of boring that goes way, way back. Certainly when you get to things like shawms and cofers, they're not pith bored, they're bored just down billets of wood in the same way that we do. I don't do pith boring, partly because it's really difficult to get that sort of wood. So I use wood that is out of the planks, as you've seen.
Yes, because we don't coppice wood to the same extent. They would have been wood would have been grown as a crop. It would have been coppiced, and therefore to get wood more or less of the right dimensions to make these instruments would have been, you know, it would have been standard.
It would have been a lot, certainly a lot easier. I do know that there was an industry devoted to making wooden water pipes. The cities were supplied with water with 6-8 foot long pipes of oak or another hard wood, and the bores in those were about that sort of diameter. And somebody did talk to me once about, they thought that the big recorders that still exist in the museums on the continent could have been bored out by people who were professional wood borers. We simply don't know, so I can't answer that question really accurately, I'm sorry.
They had to do it somehow, didn't they? Michael Withers, if you would like to put your question, that would be great, if you're there.
Hello, Michael.
Hello, Michael.
You are an absolute magician. You're an alchemist. Who converts these things. Can you not hear me? Hello?
No.
Turn yourself up, Michael, if you can. Or shall I say it?
Hang on. Is that any better?
That is better.
Yes, that's better.
Hey!
Hey!
Just saying, thank you very much, Eric. You're an absolute alchemist. Turn these things out. The one thing that I really have no idea how you do, and I would love to know, is how you make the crooks and the bocals for these instruments.
Right, I can give you, let's see if I can give you a whistle stop on that one. Is there a quick question that Jane could answer while I'm prepared? Actually, I won't take long. I can do this here and now for you.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay.
This is a magic box of tricks here.
Okay, let's go over to the bench here where you can see the little...
Sorry.
Everyone's getting seasick the night.
Sorry, I'm trying to do this smoothly for you all.
Right, we start off with a profile, a development. So that is going to be, can you see that?
Yeah.
That is going to be a crook for a bass, Kirtle or Dulcian, a 4/6 high pitch. I know that because he's got it written on it. Okay. And so what happens is that it's made, and again, the sides aren't straight. It has a slight curve on it. There are like 4 or 5 different tapers on it. Made really accurately. We're using verniers. We know the thickness of brass. It is then heated up and allowed to cool down. That process is called annealing, and it softens the metal slightly, and it is then
Shall I show them the picture of the half?
It's then,
Oh, no.
yeah, that's a good idea. It's then beaten around a mantle. So that's going to be the final shape of it. And it is beaten around into the tube that is then tapered, and then it is soldered. A long seam all the way down here is soldered. And if you come this way, this is the hearth.
I'll move slowly so you don't get seasick.
This is our brazen hearth.
There we go.
And so this is where the kneading and the soldering is done. We use a good quality silver solder that is that allows you to sort of bend the instrument. Having soldered it, it is then cleaned up, and the rounding process it continues. I try to get them as accurately as I possibly can before they're soldered, because it's a lot easier to work. Just stay there a second. The development dictates the shape, and over the years, well, years ago, I made loads and loads of different crooks to change the shape of the finished crook. Say that. To change the shape of the finish. So to change the shape of the finished crook. My apprentice, not James, and you work. Here we are. Okay. To change the shape of the finished crook, and these slight sort of perturbations within the crook again will tune the second octave. They were found out empirically, just simply by trial and error. But if you look at the old crooks, they're very difficult to measure, but you get that feeling that there's something going on, and that helps tune the second instrument, second octave. So that's the finished crook. Not quite finished, because then it is filled up. They would have used pitch to stop the tube from collapsing, and then it is then bent round a wooden mould by hand. Yeah, popped in there, and this has got. We use a modern material called Cerabend, which is a very low melting point metal. You could use lead, but it's difficult to get out. And then it is simply bent round by hand to give you the curved shape of the crook.
Can you all see that? Yay.
I'm not going to do it because this will collapse. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Absolutely perfectly. Thank you, Eric.
Yay!
Have a go.
Oh, yeah. There was nothing else to do this weekend.
So that's crook making.
I'm just going to ask a couple of other questions, if that's okay with people. Let me just see where I am. Yeah, Victoria and Alan were asking, can they see the cap where the Kirtle bore goes through 180 degrees?
The cap where the Kirtle bore...
Oh, where the bend goes round inside the bore.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
There it is.
Can you see through there?
Oh, yeah.
It is cut underneath the wood.
It's a difficult job.
There are two ways of doing this. You can either remove all the wood, in which case you have to make an oval plug. Can you just hold that there as well a sec? Thank you.
Oh.
Or
He disappears.
Where's he gone?
He's coming back. He's coming back.
hello. In which case you have to cut an oval plug, which is individual for each instrument. And if the instrument comes back to be rebored or overhauled or repaired or something, you take the plug out and you have to make a new one. Really fiddly. This method, by undercutting with various tools, files and what have you, rasps. Okay. This is dashing around the workshop time. Drilled out and then filed away. It's a little bit tedious, but what you end up with is a round hole here, which is reamed out slightly, and then a wooden plug goes in there, and is gently banged in. And I've lost the other plug, but anyway, you get the idea. And a plug goes in there. It is then cut off and smoothed off, and then I apply candle wax to it just to make sure that it is airtight. So you then end up with two little discs of wood, little plugs, to make that bore a continuous bore from here going down, across the bottom, back up the other side. So it doubles the length of the bore is double the length of the instrument. So this ends up, this bore is more or less the same size instrument. This one is a little bit more portable than that one because the bore is folded back on itself. Then if it comes back into the workshop to be repaired or overhauled or what have you, pre-reamed, I can knock the plugs out and I can quickly turn a couple of plugs that will just fit in there very easily. Does that help you?
Yeah, amazing. And just because I'm a bit aware of time, I'm going to read the next question as well from Sarah. What material is used for the sliders between the brass and the hole?
Oh, on the extended face. It's the sliders are brass, and that's it. And there's a the brass with a little turned button that is soldered in, and it goes under a staple here. And I didn't used to, but I now put leather underneath the staple because it's much easier for the slider to slide underneath there. So the brass and the slot is, again, that's all. This is all cut by hand because it has to curve slightly. A bit fiddly, but you end up with this this strange device, which is very effective. Yeah, they couldn't make key work that went around the corner. Well, they could, but I think there would be problems with that. I can just see Sarah saying, so there's no pad. No, there is no pad. It's the brass.
Oh yeah,
directly onto the wood.
So the wood has to be cut really accurately, and I the way I do it is I don't put the staple into the last minute. I make the slider and I cut the slot, and I rub the slider up and down over the wood, and you end up with a little bit of black where it's rubbing, and you scrape the black away, and you rub it again, and you end up with it's a bit like using what's that stuff they used to use in typing for
Tipex.
No.
I saw someone's put up a question as saying, were the sliders original? And actually, what they did, when Eric was showing you the instruments we were making for the people in Bristol, we said that the keys weren't authentic. And in the Renaissance, they extended down the instrument, whereas we extend upwards these days. So, and that's because the pitch of the instruments in the Renaissance, you would have had an alto in G, whereas now the modern convention is an alto in F. But they did extend downwards. They liked their bass notes.
I think it's something that we as wind players need to encourage because they like those low notes. I mean, if you think of a bass shawl with its keys, I don't have one here. I'll have one in medieval music in the Dales next year. All that key work, a huge amount of work for 3 extra notes. They thought it was really, obviously they thought it was necessary to do that because that was how they figured about the music, at the cadences, descending, diapason notes, etc. It was very much, I think it reflects, it gives us an insight into the way they were thinking about the music that perhaps we don't really understand.
Barry, come on, you've got a monster question. We've got 5 minutes.
Far away. Can't hear anything.
Barry, are you there? Calling Barry Pierce.
Oh, we've sent him away, Jill.
He's gone to sleep.
Sorry, I'll mute myself. It returns to the question of accuracy, really. Barry says, given the difference, the sub-millimetre differences in bore make, do you believe our ancestors were engineering to the same level? I ask because with bowed instruments, tapered friction pegs with just a scraper and a basic blade, it's possible to make pegs fit within 1,000th of a millimetre, and they need to be to work properly. It always amazes me that such accuracy was achievable 100 years ago and gives me an amazing appreciation for their skills. Does this equally apply in the wind instruments?
That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah. Hi, Barry.
Well,
Oh, there you are.
The answer is they must have been working, certainly in the wind instruments, they must have been working to the same degree of accuracy that we are working. I think what we have to do and appreciate is it's a different mindset. We tend to work, we use vernier gauges and things with dial gauges to work to that sort of thing. And the way they cut the bores was perhaps slightly different from the way they did it. You know, you can take a scrape of something. Okay, the easiest example I can give you, Barry, is reed making. In making a reed, I use dial gauges, etc. I use dial gauges to measure. Here we are, expensive dial gauge, to measure the thickness of the blades of the reed when I'm making it. That'll give me some indication there. What's that one reading? I can't read it upside down, 0.7 something or other. And I just use that for reassurance. They wouldn't have had this. But if you hold this up to a light, and I can't do it today because it's a lovely sunny day and there's far too much light in the workshop, but on a normal dull, bleak day, you can hold this up to a light and you can see the light shining through it, and you can see sort of the opacity of the cane will give me some idea of its thickness. So I think their approach was slightly more empirical. Ours tends to be more of an engineered approach. But as you said, you know, you get a peg and you scrape it, and you might take a 200th of a millimetre off of it or something like that, and it fits. That doesn't necessarily, hasn't actually been measured by anything at all. In the same way, in fitting these sliders, I don't measure them. I just use I use the actual pieces of brass themselves to show me where wood needs to be taken away, and we're taking a small amount away. When it comes to the bores, it's about the general shape. And, you know, I see students who sort of coming into the, when I was teaching, I used to see students coming into the woodwind instrument making game who become obsessed with measurements to the nth degree. And it was like, you need to step back from this a bit, because they couldn't have done that. They would not have had that approach. There was a little bit more sort of, a little bit more feeling, a bit more empirical. So you have the bore, and it's the general shape of the bore. The fact that it moves in and out is more important than actually how much it moves in and out. Yes, the rate of taper is important. And recently, when I say recently, anything in my life that's recent is like 10, 12 years ago, talking to some French bagpipe makers, they have this thing about to change the pitch, which means you have to change the rate of taper, because the smaller the instrument, the steeper the rate of taper, the higher the pitch, the lower the pitch, so that rate of taper changes and narrows down. So the rate of taper in a bore on a bass curtain, on a bass curtain, is much shallower than on, say, spiral. And what they do is they know the measurement of the diameter of the bagpipe at the 6th, I think it's either the 6th or the 7th hole, probably the 6th hole. And that's the same on all their bagpipes. It doesn't matter whether it's a chanter that long or a chanter that long. And that changes the rate of taper. They couldn't tell you what that rate of taper was. They don't have to. They've done it by this sort of more empirical method. Does that help answer your question, Barry?
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Right, any more questions from the good folks out there?
Well, I bet there would be, Eric, but we are out of time.
Okay.
That was absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure that people will be storing up their questions, and when Malton Castle,
next year,
you will be besieged with more questions, right? As a result of this fascinating presentation. Thank you so much. It's amazing to have gone live to your workshop, and Jane as well. Thank you so much for doing that.
Real pleasure, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see you all next year.
Thank you. Thank you so much.